who opens a school door closes a prison. With that, we know web psychiatrist Dr. Leahcim Semaj. Dr. Semaj, very sobering topic on which to invite your participation and comment here. Let me just ask you to give me your own initial response to the grave situation as outlined in that research finding.
Well, psychologist,
Yes.
not psychiatrist. But I can.
I'm very sorry.
I
I actually thought I had said psychologist.
No, you demoted me. uh, Listen, one simple I could say, I told you so.
Yes.
In May 2021, I did a presentation to the Jamaica Teachers Association, and I called it. Because as of April 2020, 191 schools had actually shut their primary and secondary school system. Almost 2 billion children were impacted. But the level of preparation for the teachers for taking this on was totally uneven. Totally uneven. Now, what I predicted was going to happen, there's three things are going to happen at the end of this. All 3 R's, but different re-enrollment. Because some kids are just not going to return to school. Because this out of school for so long, literally, the ritual of school. Remember now, school is about 2 broad categories of activity. One is called pedagogy, and the other is called socialization. So when children are not going to school, not getting into that rhythm, some children will just not go back at all. Some of them will have started earning money to support their family. Some of them were totally disengaged because of the frustration that they experience in this thing called online learning, which we shouldn't call it that. It was called emergency teaching response. Why? The teachers had absolutely no preparation. And remember, the concept of online learning goes back to 1990s. The word e-learning was first created in 1998. So there's a backdrop to this. And what we need for that is a teacher who is a hybrid between a broadcaster and a master teacher. The average teacher doesn't have any of these traits. It's a total different persona you need to teach an online class than to stand in front of a classroom. So, re-enrollment, you're going to lose some of the students. Remediation, most of the students will not have been able to keep up with the academic pace because what we predicted then, what the data was showing us then, anything from as little as, let me check my figures here, up to 200,000 students were having problems with internet access. Up to 200,000 students between bandwidth problem, unavailability. I did a presentation for a couple of schools. And one of the questions I asked the teachers, by the way, how were you engaging in online? The majority of them were using their cell phones. There's only so much you can do with a smartphone. The majority of the teachers said they were using their smartphone to try to conduct the online class. I work online. I have a problem sometimes with the 3 computers I have in front of me and the 3 screens. Much less you to try to be engaged in a group of students just via your cell phone alone. So remediation was predicted.
Some are tuned out entirely.
Well, part of that is completely because some just log on and check out. Because they realize, though, school requires some other things to keep you engaged in the classroom. How many times Earl, pay attention. Earl, stop hitting Johnny in his side. You remember those days, Earl?
Right. And in this instance, you can't see Johnny.
No, so you don't know what's going on out there. And on top of that, no, remember, earlier Capri data showed us that, the majority of the students, it was the mothers who took the bulk of the responsibility for engaging the school at the home end. The mothers. But many of those mothers had their work to do at the same time. So that the children, that kind of reinforcement context was not taking place. And the level of frustration for most students with the spotty internet, with the fact that most teachers did not know what they were doing. I remember in that same JTA conference that I took part, there was one particular teacher to show how she had turned the corner of her living room into a science lab, and the way she set the phone to get the pictures and so on. Incredible. But then there's another, so we talk about we're going to have re-enrollment, remediation, but then even the bigger one, re-socialization. When you go to school, the level of socialization in terms of pro-social values enhancement that takes place. What about children who for over a year has not had any of that? And their socialization has been fueled by unbridled access to the internet, unbridled access to cable TV. Given that, children are not going to choose education. They're going to choose anything else. Houston,
Yes.
we have a problem.
That's a wrap. I'm Earl Moxam, and I still have on the telephone psychologist Dr. Leahcim Semaj, and we're joined now as well by attorney at law and a regular member of the team on That's a Wrap, attorney at law Nicole Gordon. Hi, Nicole. Dr. Semaj was just going through the difficulties faced by the teachers and the students, and I think it was important for him to, as he did, to highlight the challenges the teachers themselves were having, because we tend to speak, and rightly so, of how the students are being deprived of what one would normally expect of the education experience, but also this has been new for so many of the teachers as well. But let's focus for a moment now on how do we deliver on our obligation to our children in terms of their rights in respect of education. What's to be done now?
Hi, good afternoon, Earl.
Hi.
Good afternoon, Dr. Semaj. So, of course, the Convention on the Rights of the Child, says that children do have a right to education. The sort of most distinct description of that obligation from a governmental perspective is sort of a four-factor description that I found. It's from the Committee on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. And it says that the obligation means that education ought to be, one, available, accessible, acceptable, and adaptable. And I thought about it and sort of used it as a benchmark for how we are performing with respect to the obligation that I believe that we have as a society. And I should say here that our Charter of Rights actually does not say that children have a right to access to education. And I really believe that it should. It doesn't at the moment.
Well, we took that for granted?
Well, I suppose, I hope so. But at the moment it doesn't. And I believe that there's a certain force behind putting something into writing, and this is why we had presented our Charter of Rights in the first place. But one thing that stuck out for me, Earl, is this matter of adaptability in the context of rights. And this is simply because education has to respond to the student in the context of the evolving needs of society. And you have to say to yourself, well, are you providing the education that the child needs if it's not responding to the society? I think what COVID did was to sort of exacerbate the inequalities, the social and economic inequalities that existed. And obviously there's a resource issue. But I also thought to myself that this really, as we respond to this crisis, ought to provide the opportunity for us as a country and for the government to reorient its mind around what our education system is right now and what it ought to look like in the future. And I think, for example, someone said to me, a teacher said to me, an education officer in 2021 still has to visit a school to look at the attendance register because it's paper-based. Really and truly, why is that happening in 2021? I don't think any student at this time ought to leave an educational institution and not have an email address. So I'm saying to myself, are we really preparing our students for the future as it exists now? That kind of bothers me a bit, and I think we need to be very forward thinking, and we have to sort of contextualize this and use this as a springboard to determine what is it that our education system, what is it supposed to look like.
All right. Pause there. Let me go back to Dr. Semaj. And in respect, looking to the future, Dr. Semaj, two things. Picking up on what Nicole just said in terms of what state of being does a student leave the school in, and particularly at this time now because of these peculiar circumstances, if we are going to deliver on our obligations to the children, is there the need for a sort of special dispensation for this cohort of students passing through the pandemic period?
Well,
and secondly, in terms of what do you see the social impact on Jamaica looking like 5 years, 10 years down the road arising from these problems if we do not address them adequately?
if we, starting with our addressing this problem, we could turn it into a bonus. For example, one thing we now know, the future of education is hybrid. And I've been saying this for the last 30 years. I remember I started a program where I facilitated students calling. I gave students access to a number called 93OKCXC, where you could call that number in the morning, leave your question, and at 5 o'clock in the evening, between 5 and 7, I had Joan Andrea hosting this program for me. We'll get the best teacher in Jamaica on the telephone for that subject, and we could engage that teacher using just telephone. Now, we have the technological capability. We should have our best teachers available to provide these kind of online. This new teacher I'm telling you about now, it's a hybrid between a broadcaster and a master teacher. So that these best teachers would provide in lessons. You could provide them online. You could provide them on CD, whatever, asynchronously. So every school would have access to the best teacher. So many of our other teachers will now become teaching assistants to facilitate this great teacher. Now, if we don't do that, we are in deep trouble. But we can use this to springboard into the future. The other remediation and the re-enrollment aspect is that when children are lost to the school system, remember for the last 20 years in Jamaica, we've been talking about these disengaged, these young people who are not engaged. They're out of school, but they're also not working. Now, that cohort has been bumped up significantly. And you know, the devil finds work for idle hands. So that a remediation and a re-enrollment and emergency program will need, this goes beyond the school system. 20 years ago, when I presented the educational system with a model for re-engages that 12 to 20 boys in each school who were on the departure lounge, they told me they had no budget for that. I said, you don't do it now, you defer the problem to the Ministry of National Security and Justice.
Yes.
So you
have a minute, Nicole, before we wrap up.
No, I just wanted to pick up on something that Dr. Semaj was saying very quickly. He mentioned the teachers. I think professional development, we have to look very carefully at professional development for teachers and upskilling teachers and simultaneously providing some support for them, just psychological support.
Absolutely.
I think it's very stressful for the teachers because they're not accustomed to this. And again, a part of the reason that they're not accustomed to this is because our system has not been sufficiently progressive in how it is that we have structured what it is we want it to look like. So there are lots of things. It's going to require resources, but if we're very serious about preparing our children for the future, from the cognitive perspective, from the affective perspective, they have to learn technology. They have to learn even how to be social on the technology and using the technology. And the system has to be different. It can't be what it was before.
And it has to be hybrid. I'm out of time. Thank you both so much. Nicole Gordon, the attorney at law, and